As a small open market economy, changes in asset prices have an important influence over macroeconomic developments through a variety of channels: the cost of financing, the cost of imports, and effects on both aggregate supply and aggregate demand. In taking monetary policy decisions, we need to factor into our assessment of the outlook for price developments all these effects and include them in our formulation of policy decisions to reach our 2% inflation target.
That is bullshit.
The pound has taken another hammering, while London's blue chip stocks share index slumped into the red after the UK was heavily criticized by the IMF, International Monetary Fund, over its handling of economic policy. The B.o.E, Bank of England, is facing calls to convene an emergency meeting to consider hiking interest rates to try and counter the government's tax cut measures. The B.o.E has opted to intervene in bond markets, saying, quote, it would start buying long-dated government bonds at whatever scale is necessary, end of quote, in a bid to restore, quote, restore orderly market conditions, end of quote. The move comes after the cost of UK government borrowing spiked dramatically in recent days, surpassing rates paid by Italy and Greece. The B.o.E is still going to try and navigate inflation on one hand and the threat of recession on the other, while at the same time trying to keep an eye on the sterling market's volatility. He said, quote, it's not a very easy balancing act, end of quote. But as always, a democratic type of government never takes responsibility for anything that they do. They will always deflect accountability to any of the turmoil that they actually caused by their ridiculous spending and stupid utopian fairy tale policies. For example, this article from Independent says the government has attempted to deny responsibility for Britain's financial woes, saying that all major economies are suffering as a result of Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine. You know that one is old, but somehow it keeps creeping into economic conversations. So I'm pretty much done with listening to these guys 100%. I do my own research and get multiple views. Let's do the same here. Editor, roll clip, fair use.
Hello, fellow Rebel Capitals. Hope you're well. The Bank of England just announced one of the most insane policies I have ever heard of. And that's saying a lot. So let's get into this story.
Do you realise that yesterday the banking system of the UK almost collapsed? No, I'm not sort of being hysterical or extreme or anything like that here. This almost happened. The Bank of England had to step in because of these margin calls.
Amazing today how many MPs I came across who were looking at their phones and looking at graph lines, and they were the graph lines that showed you the pound sliding against the dollar, the graph lines that showed you the cost of government borrowing going up, and recently a city projection of what interest rates are going to look like in this country. It's just a forecast in the city, but it was absolutely eye-watering. We are in the early hours of a big new economic experiment in this country.
They termed it a mini budget, but it was a gigantic change of direction.
Is your plan a gamble?
Kwasi Kwarteng announced the biggest tax-cutting package since 1972.
Now, what the British government led by Liz Truss did is absolute lunacy. It is a recipe for disaster for the United Kingdom. You have insane record inflation, and on top of that you pour gasoline on the fire by issuing more stimulus and more tax cuts. This is absolute lunacy, and this will push the Bank of England to be even more aggressive in their tightening policy to shore up the British pound. And now we have this tit for tat between the UK government and the Bank of England, and this will guarantee that the United Kingdom will fall into a massive deep recession. On top of that, it's not just the Bank of England or the Bank of Japan or the ECB. We have the currency wars heating up significantly as we speak right now. Central banks are now pinned against each other. You see the Fed tightening, and that pushes the value of the US dollar higher. Now, this is not good for US-based companies, but it is good for US inflation. It pushes US inflation down. On the other hand, it pushes currencies such as the British pound, the euro, the yen, and many others down significantly, and that pushes inflation in those countries higher. And in response, their central banks have to increase their rates higher to shore up their currency, whatever it is, the British pound, the euro, the yen. And then as a response, the dollar goes down and inflation rises higher here, and the Fed has to act more aggressively. We have a massive race to the bottom among central banks. And this is the most dangerous episode in this bear market by far, because something is going to blow up here. If the US dollar continues on its meteoric rise, something is going to blow up overseas. And that something could be really big, and it could be contagious to the global economy. You see, now we're entering the systemic risk episode of this bear market. And it is by far the most dangerous episode. Back in 2008, we got the systemic risk episode at around October, November of 2008, the collapse of Lehman, and you probably remember the aftermath of this event in terms of the global economy and financial markets. My hunch is we're getting closer and closer here to something blowing up and ushering the systemic risk episode in the global market. Now, all of this talk is fundamental in nature, but these fundamentals could impact two other factors that move markets. Remember, markets move based on three things. Number one, the fundamentals. Number two, the technicals. Number three, the mechanics. But the fundamentals could cause a mechanical event, such as margin calls, and things could blow up. But for now, in the immediate horizon, what do we have in charge here? Are the fundamentals in charge? They are in the long run, and they've been so far this year. But right now, this moment, this week, is it the fundamentals? The answer is not really. Is it the mechanics? Not really. We don't have an options-related event this week, but we are in a pivotal technical point here.
Great Financial Crisis 2.0 has started. Today's video will be a high-level overview of the economic landscape. I'm going to be going into details on each one of these topics in the days ahead, so please be sure to subscribe. So let me ask you, do you know why the stock market skyrocketed on Wednesday? So let me tell you why. In the United Kingdom, the bond market was crashing. The government said their financial markets were in danger of seizing up. And their government said that they're going to allow the Bank of England to print an unlimited amount of money. So whatever is necessary to stop the crash. The Bank of England, they did their policy change. They did their pivots. They did it much earlier than was expected. So they were doing quantitative tightening, interest rates got too high, and their financial markets were collapsing. So they had two options: a deep recession, maybe a depression, or turn the money printers back on. So guess what they did? They turned the money printers back on. I mean, that's an obvious choice if you're a central bank or if you're a government.
It has been about the dollar. Some big currency moves are following today, and the main action is taking place right there, with dollar strength causing turmoil for global FX. We're going to start with the British pound here, an already falling pound touching its weakest level against the U.S. dollar. We're talking about the weakest on record on the back of a badly received mini budget. And, you know, really, Inez, this is one of those stories I think a lot of people are sort of last week started following through when the announcement came through from this new UK government that they would, in fact, be implementing permanent tax cuts. We're talking about sort of Reagan-style trickle down. And that was not received really well. We saw the big swings. Now we're talking about at least one analyst, and we're going to have that guest on later today, calling for parity in terms of the sterling against the dollar. We're also seeing the euro hit the lowest against the dollar since 2004. So, you know, we don't often talk about FX so much, but this is really where all investors are watching right now.
You've made the point that we still have some underlying policy issues to address. Can you walk us through one by one what you think needs to happen here imminently in the next few days, the next few weeks?
Yeah, and let's take the example of the UK because I think it's very illustrative. So, John, we knew that the exit from the paradigm of easy money was going to be hard. And we thought that the major challenge was going to be the balance between inflation and recession risk, as you heard in the tape. The question now is financial stability. That it turns out that there's also significant financial stability risk. And all it takes is some action, some unforeseen action. In the case of the UK, it was the fiscal action to trigger this financial stability concern. So suddenly, the Bank of England finds itself in the ECB situation, where it has to figure out how to use monetary policy to contain inflation, and then some other measure to contain financial risk. And then these two things are in conflict. So we've discovered that this is an even more complicated exit, and it doesn't help that central banks are late. So I just think we have to buckle our seatbelt even tighter. And we have to recognize that policymakers are no longer repressors of volatility, but they contribute to volatility.
Hey guys, it's Jose, your regular Joe Blow again, keeping an eye out and my ears open and checking out this circus today. This is a circus act that will bring down the U.S. as well, because we are no different to acting in the same manner. Keep an eye on the B.o.E, Bank of England, and the Eurozone. We are in line to be next. When they collapse, as you can see how they jumped and retracted from QT back to QE in a day. That's crazy, guys. Makes you think critically on what is really going on. Do your research. Guys, this is serious stuff here. Something is about to break, and I only pray you guys are preparing to surf this coming wave and thrive and prosper for you and your families. God bless to all. Thank you as always for your continued support. And like always, for us to continue to grow, you must stay free.
It ain't hard to tell. I excel, then prevail.